You're listening to the Geek Saga podcast. This episode features audio from a discussion panel that was recorded at DragonCon 2023. This is, just to make sure y'all are in the right place, End of Days, the Loner versus the Community. The panel, I guess, is technically supposed to be about why most post-apocalyptic books, say that 5 times fast, are about loners, and you only get communities in brief glimpses. So that's kind of the general overview of the panel. I am the moderator. My name is Tara Lynn. You can find me online at a Geek Saga. I am an event planner. I do a Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones convention. I do a couple podcasts, Sagas and Sass, and Geek Saga podcast. Sagas and Sass is genre-lit. Geek Saga is where you can find my panel recordings and other random stuff that I decide to put up. And then I also published a zombie apocalypse novel many, many years ago. It's called How to Start Living in the Zombie Apocalypse by T.L. Walker. And we're going to go down the line, have the panelists all introduce themselves, tell people where they can find you, and then we'll get started with the conversation.
I'm William Joseph Roberts, aka Hillbilly. I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, anything the evil mind squirrels demand of me, and I'm also the lead publisher at Three Ravens Publishing, which you can find all my stuff at Three Ravens Publishing or WilliamJosephRoberts.com.
I'm Jay Boyce. I write lit RPG. I am also worked as an editor for a long time, and so I've edited a bunch of books. One of which is like my brother's post-apocalyptic Red Mage. Advent Red Mage is the is the title. And I are writing. Eventually, we'll have my own post-apocalyptic series out as well. So I mostly deal with system apocalypses.
And she has a new book out today.
I have a new book out today. It's a VRMMO, so not post-apocalyptic.
It's already at the number, 3 in one of his categories?
Oh, nice.
Good start.
Damn good start.
So you should look that up before they're all gone. I'm Frank Morin. I write all types of fantasy. I've got some young adult epic fantasy, the Petrolus series. I've got an urban fantasy series that is really fun. My latest one I'm very excited about is Bacon Master of the Apocalypse. That'll be why I'm on this panel today. But anyway, this is a humorous fantasy set in a third world with culinary wizards and food magic. Kind of a very different approach to apocalypse, and I'm very excited about it. You probably can't tell.
The main character's name is Rasher. We were on a panel this past hour, and I saw the name, and I was just like, I love it.
Bacon for power.
Exactly.
He's a bacon master, so he can channel the awesomeness of bacon for superhuman enhancements. But he has friends who are cheese wizards or muffin mages or things like that. Super fun.
Hi, I'm Gail Z and Morgan Bryce with Baylor Write Epic and Urban Fantasy. I have 3 series of post-apocalyptic stories. Some medieval, some modern day, some near future. And as Morgan Bryce, I write urban fantasy, mail and paranormal romance. But yeah, those 3 post-apocalyptic series are why I'm here. And I find it intriguing to talk about the end of the world and figure out how it might work. And I'm on a ton of programming this weekend, so if you look me up, I'm easy to find and hard to miss.
Me too.
I'm Jay Brink, Jeff, and I'm a little RPG author writing Defiance of the Fall, which is a apocalyptic system apocalypse, I guess you call it. And I guess that's why I'm here. And
Nice.
We should be calling it RPG Apocalypse.
Apparently.
He has 10 books.
I call it system apocalypse. Am I old school or what?
There's copyright issues. So
I hear tell that Jay, you were the one who suggested this topic. So I would like to know why this is important to you and why you suggested this topic for all of us to be up here and talk about.
part of it was just because I read a lot of apocalyptic lit RPG, and I thought it was really fascinating how usually there are people, they think that building their community is important, but they're almost never in it. And so I'm always like, okay, so why is the loner care about that community so much when they're most, like 90% of the time, they're not in it? I think it's fascinating that like most of them become the leaders of these communities. And I'm just like, you're not there. You are very absentee leaders. But it's just interesting as to what drives it. And that's why I suggested this.
When you say building the community, do you mean like physical communities or just, or could it also, okay, it can also be groups?
It can be groups. A lot of the time they are actually building like a physical base and trying to create a safe haven for people who are less impressive than them, to put it nicely.
Well, I think that you might not want to be a leader, but it does seem like a lot of the leader characters in in post-apocalyptic literature, television, etc., have this thrust upon them. Not necessarily because they're better than one person or another, but because they...
I think a lot of it is especially in lit RPG at least, it's the power, because they have the power to protect it. And so they might not always be there, but they'll come in at important times.
Yeah, I think that's an important trope because, we talk about the apocalypse society as we know it is broken down, right? And either a new world has arisen or depending on what type of apocalypse it is, people might just be still dying off.
Frequently.
It happens a lot. I read Dungeon Crawler Carl, that's a great one, right? Everybody's just dying, which is great. I mean, it was a great book. That was the whole point, right? The apocalypse will be broadcast. But you look at something like, I was just reading Primal Hunter, which is another great lit RPG that I read, where he does a lot more in the kind of the world building, post-apocalypse, kind of rebuilding society than a lot of them I've read. I was very fascinated by that. Even though the main character is just so boss, he again can protect his community, and there's that whole question of leadership is different than it is now. Now it's like, I can get the votes, and there it's like, I can kill you if I don't like you, or I can fight off the monsters. And so there's a very different leadership paradigm than in the society we see now. So it's just really fun to explore that, I think.
And I'm going to be the contrarian since I trained in history. And the truth is that when people have gone through apocalypses or have decided to colonize an unsettled area or deal with some kind of catastrophe, the ones who survive for very long are not the loners. They're the ones who know how to build and maintain a community, work within a community, and protect that community, not necessarily through force. I think that the idea of a loner plays great for video games. That's fun to play. I think it plays into a lot of our fantasies, and I think it plays into the American mythology of the loner cowboy out there who actually was part of a group of cowboys and really was not on his own nearly as much as John Wayne suggests.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I'm sorry. And there were more ice cream parlors in San Francisco at the time than there were brothels. Look it up.
That's why there's so many gunfights.
That's right, over the ice cream, Rocky Road. So I enjoy seeing how communities, sometimes of people who never expected to rely on each other, maybe didn't even start liking each other, maybe were groups of friends beforehand, now have to deal with completely altered reality and deal with the way it changes the dynamics among their group, and see people wrestle with who has the skills that are needed, not necessarily to always do things by force. You need people who are enforcers, but then you also need people who know how to get other people to work nicely together. You can't shoot them all. And so that's I am fascinated with using groups and communities to survive an apocalypse, even if you have people who are quasi-loners and have to move among different groups and still work with the groups. So that's my take on it. A little bit contrarian, but I love seeing people work together to survive.
I don't think it's contrarian, honestly. And you mentioned just kind of the psychology of particularly the United States is like, you should be independent. You should be able to take care of yourself. You shouldn't need the support of others. And that is honestly, for most people, so wrong.
Yeah. Well,
it never really worked that way. It's just a very, very comforting and ego-feeding mythology.
Like capitalism.
Coming from Southern West Virginia, growing up, we relied on community all the time. I mean, we were always community building. If something happened, the community got together. Like, there was one winter that a tree fell, landed on one of the neighbors' roofs in the middle of December, and snow's falling. We're out there as a community roofing this thing to get it done. The women folk are over there getting food cooked. We're out there freezing our butts off, getting shingles on. Shingling in the wintertime sucks, so don't ever do it. But I grew up in that kind of mentality. And to me, that's just second nature when writing this stuff. And, for the leadership within a community, it might get thrust upon them because they happen to be the smartest acting character out of the group. They might be the one that graduated 8th grade or whatever, depending on the scenario and the location. Whoever's the smartest, whoever seems to be the strongest, whoever seems to be that alpha character, they'll get that thrust upon them whether they want it or not because they have that leadership capability. And playing on those tropes, it's fun. I like to screw with characters. I like to make them suffer. So throwing something at them like that they really don't want, oh, that's beautiful. And just make them suffer through it. It's like, I don't care that you're having marital problems. We're busy trying to make sure we got food. Go take care of that your own self. Go talk to Marge down the street or something. I'm busy, and just make them suffer through those situations. Mm-hmm. But it's things that everyday people can connect with too. You pull that emotional resonance by connecting those daily things that everybody has to go through anyway.
And everybody's got to sleep at some point.
Yep.
At that moment when you look around and go, an adult should take care of this. Oh crap, I guess I'm the adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stinks.
Yeah, it does.
I don't like being the adult.
I think a big difference here is like a real apocalypse compared to the fantasy. Where the fantasy apocalypse is much more geared toward a loner, because sooner or later this loner will be strong enough by fighting monsters, finding treasure, that they can do whatever a community can do by himself or herself. And that's what makes the rise of a hero and the loner so interesting or appealing in the fantasy realm.
I think in the lit RPG genre especially though, part of it is also they know how to game the system, because it's usually the gamers who are also antisocial loners to begin with who are getting power.
I think part of what we see also in apocalyptic, literature or television or movies is it's harder to write a really gripping board meeting in some ways. If you're really getting gritty into the community finances and, counting the seeds and things like that. It's important, it's vital, but it's really boring, right? So we want to get to the fact that everyone's dying of the plague or the monsters are coming in, you're going to fight them off or whatever. In the background, someone's counting the seeds because you got to do that. Mm-hmm. And managing that can be tricky. And it kind of depends on what you want to focus on. But I do like the stories where we can embrace kind of both aspects of it, because we got to have it exciting, depending on what you're writing, but I like to write exciting stories, so I want to have a lot of action and really kind of explore that. So you need a loner for that generally, because you're not going to go defeat the monster by committee necessarily. Sometimes you do, especially with the bosses, but you have to have inspiring characters to kind of drive the narrative, and then weave in the community stuff as well, so that they have a base to work from and not die and have some food to eat and things like that.
Get the crafting.
Yeah, get the crafting done and stuff.
Well, yeah, because if you're really rebuilding from almost scratch or from the scraps of what survived, rebuilding agriculture is not exciting, but it's necessary. It takes time. The impatient, overly muscled warlord is not going to stick around to plant corn and wait for it to grow, but somebody needs to if you're going to eat.
No, he's going to be the one running the community of pillagers.
Right. So one of the things that I really find fascinating writing in post-apocalyptic worlds is how do all these disparate abilities and knowledge bases, how do they matter after everything? Yeah, we immediately look at who can fight and protect, but who has the knowledge to grow crops? Who knows about livestock? Who knows about medicine when you can't just order your prescriptions in at Walgreens?
That's where everybody loves the rednecks.
And those head witches and those ladies in the hollers that can fix you up. Yep. Exactly. In one of my series, the people who survive best are the historical reenactors, Society for Creative Anachronism, the Amish. And in other words, the people who had cultivated the old ways and kept them suddenly know how to do all the stuff that you need to do.
Oh, my sister and brother-in-law have a farm. I grew up on a horse farm. They have an actual working farm, and she does homesteading classes, and her homesteading classes are sold out like months in advance.
Yeah. One of the funny things I think about some of the post-APOC out there, people rely on information from preppers instead of going to the herbalists, to the survivalists, to the going to the Amish and just trying to learn. And they're willing to teach as long as you're not trying to convert and other things, but they're willing to teach you skills because they see it as a benefit.
I will say that half the time you can't find them because they're dead.
In the post-apocalypse or now?
In the post-apoc.
Okay.
I was like, my brain was like, in the post-apoc, you don't go find those people because travel is hard and they're dead.
Travel is hard,
Well, it's also going to depend on what caused your apocalypse.
True.
If you have the sudden plague that wipes out 99% of everybody, okay. if you have other conditions or maybe kind of a rolling series of collapses, you still end up destroying civilization, but it may take the toll is going to look different. And the people who were already not necessarily off the grid, but maybe living in rural areas or had already moved out of the major cities and those networks stand a better chance of surviving than the people who were downtown.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that the idea of, and unfortunately, I don't know, with mainstream media, the post-apocalyptic stories that make it into mainstream media tend to be the sudden downfalls, right?
Sure.
But that
is pretty much all an EMP.
Yeah, I mean, Last of Us, Walking Dead. Name 6 more television shows that are post-apocalyptic.
Evolution, Revolution.
Revolution.
That was where all electrical stopped.
Yeah,
Which
yes.
that was a weird one
That's
too.
that's actually most lit RPGs is the EMP hits, all electronics die, and that's where most people die, is if people like on planes and cars and they all suddenly stop working.
Yeah.
You're dead.
I will say this is like, oh my gosh, it's real life and it's hard, but I believe it's 8 days. I hope I have the number of days right. 8 days at Memorial. It's Katrina fallout at the Memorial Hospital in New Orleans. There's a show. It's either Apple TV or Hulu, but there's also a book that's it's obviously a true story, but if you want to read like a real life, holy crap, post-apocalyptic situation or watch it, I definitely suggest, I'm pretty sure it's 8 days at Memorial, but I definitely suggest checking that out. Now that said, in terms of tropes, because let's be real, the loner versus the community thing is in and of itself a trope, but what do you think are the maybe, let's say, I don't know if I want to say best and worst, but maybe most popular and for good reasons and most popular for maybe not good reasons that you'd like to see go away, tropes that the loner character fits into in post-apocalyptic stories? And let's start at the very end and work our way back so that because I know we're sharing mics and it's...
Something that should go away. You can be a loner without being antisocial and edgy. And I think someone who does their own thing but can maintain a positive outlook, maybe something like that, you should see more of.
Happy apocalypse.
Yeah, your main character doesn't have to be a psychopath. It would probably help if he wasn't. So it could be somebody who maybe is a loner for many, many reasons that don't, as Jeff said, have to do with being mentally unstable. And so now they've been pulled back into the society that they wanted to leave. But I love seeing, what can we see that explains why they feel compelled to take on this responsibility that they were very happy to live by themselves, but now they have, whether it's an internal code of honor, whether it reminds them of something of their family. There's some internal reason for them to step up to the plate. And I like to see that more than just somebody who is big and strong and wants to push people around, tell everybody what to do, and shoot people who don't listen to them. That's kind of boring.
I'm just going to interject real quick and say they're type A and they don't think anybody else will do it properly.
They were the kid who always finished the group assignments for everybody else and turned them in. And there's validity to that.
I had
You were
things,
too.
and then
I
I was thinking about what they said, and then I lost what I was thinking about.
I do that every panel.
One of the things that I'd like to see more of is the oddball average Joe. What was it? The postman. The leader of the raider group, he was a copy machine repairman. He had no other skills other than for some reason, he was able to talk to people, and he had enough knowledge base that he was able to step up. I mean, he wasn't any big to-do Marine or Army vet or anything like that. He was just an average Joe that took the leadership role. He just happened to have that skill that shined in that apocalyptic setting. And then, even though it was a raider group, he created a community, and they were successful in what they did. It wasn't the greatest of scenarios, but it worked.
I will say there's a lot of like military in the post-apocalyptic genre. There's a ton of that. I think part of the loner one comes, at least in Lit RPG, is a lot of them start in like, oh, I was camping, or oh, I was in the wilds of Canada, or oh, I was buried in a government bunker. A lot of them are in situations where they were solo and then have to then go and find the community. I think that's one of my favorite tropes, is that they go and they're like rescuing people and they understand that they can't do anything alone. And that is why they build their communities, because they realize that. With my brother's books, he's stuck in a government bunker. He's just an IT vet, or an IT soldier. And he's got to find his way, but he also, like, the overpowered one gets really bad sometimes, but that isn't always a good thing, because you don't need a bomb in every situation.
People like explosions.
They do.
Yeah, but if you're in a small room,
Yeah, the backblast things that remove eyebrows and faces
yeah, and everything.
and everything. Yeah, you mentioned the side, or the character who's kind of a quirky or oddball sort of thing. I keep thinking back to the first season of The Walking Dead. You know, when he finally runs into the group, and the one kid who's kind of leading a lot of that. He was like, what, a pizza delivery guy or something? And he's like,
Yeah.
you know, are you a special forces guy? How do you know who's this? Oh, this pizza guy, you know?
They
And,
know the streets.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty funny. I thought that was a really cool one to kind of slip in there. And of course, they had the redneck and they had all the other kind of tropes in there, but they put that one in, which I appreciated. That was fun.
You know what I think it speaks to is that our culture isn't very good at recognizing those skills and rewarding them in normal jobs. The person who is really good at getting along with everybody and makes peace and keeps the group going doesn't usually get promoted for doing that.
No.
Those aren't the metrics that we promote people on, and yet all those metrics are BS, because in reality they don't actually matter. So when that goes out the window, then what are the skills? Those soft skills of being able to get people to work together and calm people down and keep people optimistic. The person who is always good at seeing what needs to be done and getting, a couple of people to go do it. So those people might be the pizza guy. They might be the copier repair guy. They just didn't get promoted based on those skills because our culture didn't value those skills.
Sure.
And then when all the trappings of culture go away, now all of a sudden a whole new set of skills are valuable, and that egotistical, narcissistic boss who just raved at people but didn't actually know how to do anything, guess who's out of a job? Because nobody needs him for anything anymore.
This is going to get knifed in an alley.
Yeah.
There is that
Or he's going to go
flag.
hungry because nobody wants to feed him.
I do like that in my brother's book. I'm just going to use his as an example all the time because I know it really well. Because he's in Washington, D.C. And so there are a whole bunch of bureaucrats around. As they're rebuilding the community, the guy's like, I'm in charge because I was in charge before. And they're like, says who?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a really fun thing to explore in post-apocalyptic stories, is what changes in society depending how intense and sudden the apocalypse is, and what skills will now suddenly be important. What happens to the people who have current world skills and don't know how to adapt? What happens to the people who are flexible or open-minded or have other skills that aren't appreciated, and how do those kind of bubble up to the surface and suddenly become important to survive, because now different things are important. And that's really fun to explore with these kind of stories.
They go into the community building and all the farming, but why don't they ever really go into exploring the new food sources through the monsters, the new plants that come in and such like that, with like Ether Collapse or your brother's book and such like that? They never explore the new possible food sources.
They do sometimes. It's just it's hard.
How many people are really just willing to put themselves out there and try alien foods? That's all I'm gonna say.
I do it.
Hey,
I'm pretty
Okay.
open-minded about
You're
food,
here,
but
you don't care.
I've ate possum and coon, so it don't matter. I'll eat anything once.
I've had bull testicles. It's
I've seen that meme on Facebook that said, I want to know who initially figured out which mushrooms were safe. It's like, this one tastes like beef.
That
This
one
one
killed
killed Timmy, and this one makes you see God for a week.
Somebody got too hungry, and then everybody else just watched them.
Stuff like that really depends on the story arc that the writer's going with and the character development that they're working with. It may just not be within the realm of that. It might be in the world building and backstory, and somewhere in a short story they might delve into that, but it's just not front and center.
Because let's be honest, a book is usually about one character and you only get that character's point of
Yes.
view, so you don't
Yeah.
necessarily get to see all the background. This is actually why a loner is really, because they're easier to write them. Is this person in this room? Where did that, like,
Well, and you don't have the cast of characters that you've got to write in with all the dialogue tags and everything else. It makes it a little more difficult when you've got 15 different characters that are primary.
Well, yeah, but it depends on, again, the type, the subgenre that you're writing for it. I write, in my epic fantasy stories, you can have at least 5 viewpoint characters with integrated experiences. So it's not just one person's experience. So now you get to see people who are doing different things in different places. And that gives you a much different perspective.
much broader perspective?
Right, than when, especially for reasons of gameplay, you need to be that one person and see everything through their eyes.
I do think that when writing, whether it's a novel or a graphic novel or a TV show with post-apocalyptic media, it's the difference from fantasy or even sci-fi to an extent, where post-apocalyptic stuff really does tend to be a lot more, if not first person exactly, than second or third person, where it's focusing on one particular
Yeah,
character.
very like full
It
immersion.
gives
Because
it a sense of immediacy.
It's, yes, the immediacy, the survivalist aspect of it, that
We
it's
build that
harder.
thriller edge of.
Right. It's harder to portray that, I think, with a larger cast of characters. I'm not saying it can't be done. I think it absolutely can be. But I think people veer away from that if they're trying to break into mainstream post-apocalyptic media, because it's kind of what the audience expects,
We've
right?
trained them to
Yes,
expect the
exactly,
loner.
exactly. Any thoughts on that? And how do you, because I mean, again, you were just talking about how you prefer to write as with a cast of characters, right? So I would love to hear, I don't know, what you guys think about, other than it just being loner versus community, writing for a cast, a community of characters, and examples of how you think that can be done well, what you would do to make it.
My first novel, Flux Runners, it's sci-fi, space opera, comedy, and all that, but the crew of the ship ends up on a desert planet. They have no idea how they're getting back to Earth with no possible chances of getting back, and they start prepping. They start going through the ships, figuring out what they have to survive on, what seed stock they have on board, because we got the 3 witches on board that actually do a lot of mountain medicine type stuff and do their own thing. And I went into a full apocalypse setup trying to figure out how they're going to survive on this alien world, and trying to get the crew to work together. I had 10, 11 characters, main characters that I bounced around, scene to scene. But it starts getting tough when you're trying to make things happen. So, getting that interlacing, and you start trying to get the personalities to work together, just like anybody else, or any other group. You're going to have conflicts, you're going to have discrepancies, you're going to have the emotions are getting high because we're never getting home. What are we going to do? And, that has a breakdown of its own within the group. And then you throw aliens in the mix, and that's a whole other thing.
And again, a lot of time, it comes back to what you're trying to write. Is your alien planet survival story a thriller where there's, Aliens, the movie, when there's aliens coming in, killing everyone. In that case, farming the alien beats or whatever isn't going to take a top priority because everyone's, vomiting monsters, everyone's dying, and,
Right.
the cat and one other person is going to survive, right? Spoiler. But,
I don't think you can spoil something that's like, how old is
Wait,
Aliens?
didn't you call
Alien, like 30 something?
eggs
30 plus
alien
years?
beets?
So, well, I was thinking, now that, the question was asked, I'm like, I got to write a story where, like, the beet farmer becomes, like, the alien, tofu, lizard farmer guy that, creates a new food, and his buddy, Dag, eats it first and dies. And it can be real tragic. I mean, I can see tears happening.
Yeah.
This is good stuff. If I was writing that kind of a story, I could imagine writing, like, a post-apocalyptic Pride and Prejudice, farming, emotional roller coaster thriller. That would be really cool. In the end, the beet farmers, I'd say, it would be amazing. But I may not write that because I read a lot of action stuff. So I'd have to work in the aggressive alien side of it too. Or maybe he's got a buddy who does the corn farming that now sprouts different types of ears that, wants to take over his land. I mean, who knows? It depends on what I'm writing, and putting a farming cast in it could be really cool. I haven't done that yet, but I need to probably. So many ideas. I gotta go write.
Yeah, I go back to, it's going to be shaped very much by the circumstances of your apocalypse. So, for example, in our Wasteland Marshall series, the original events were triggered by terrorist use of limited nukes, but then that takes down parts of the grid, and that takes down, that destroys cities, and that destroys the power structure, and that takes down, you have a cascading series of catastrophes that build on each other. And 4 years in, which is where the story picks up, you've got the last 2 U.S. Marshals who are still riding their circuit. They may not be entirely human, they might not be entirely sane, but they're still on the job doing the best they can. And they are loners who move among the different enclaves that have been formed. So we get to see how people have organized themselves to survive. And our folks, our 2 main characters are always the outsiders who are still reliant on those communities for shelter and for food and for support, and they have to winter somewhere, and so they are outsiders, but they are still welcome, and they are able to move among them. That's different from one of the other series where it's an economic collapse that wipes out the power players and causes a lot of concern about being attacked from outside because the economics have collapsed. And another one where the magic has gone feral, destroyed the people, the mages, and the powerful people who had the magic, and now you really are rising from the ashes because they kind of blew everything up. So it really depends on how your apocalypse happens.
The one that I will eventually have written, and this is a different way to do multiple main characters, is that I'm co-writing it. And so we have 2 main characters and we're doing alternating POVs in an interdimensional junkyard. That this is the scraps of the universe where people got thrown and you have to survive somehow.
One thing I think speaks for loner in the apocalyptic literature is the allure of the clean slate, that everything is gone, 9 to 5 is gone, bills are gone, and you kind of want to feel that freedom through the main character. And if the main character is immediately caught in some sort of community from day one, it's just old rules replaced by new rules. So you want some freedom, some exploration, but sooner or later he will have to go back to society to create or find a community, because it gets kind of repetitive, right? You just book after book, searching for food, searching for shelter, and so on. So you have to go back and forth a little.
I do think it's really interesting to look at how different people create different communities from scratch, because all over the world we have very different communities, and so if those are created from scratch, like a dictator will have a much different community than
Religious theocracy or something.
Yeah.
like all of those things. So like every little pocket could be vastly different in how they are surviving.
I tend to write a lot of loner characters, and that's why I'm here. But because of that, I've also watched Overly Sarcastic Productions video on loners, and something Red brings up in that video is loner versus somebody who is currently alone, and what, like, the psychological angle. So like, how does it affect their mental health? Are they a loner and therefore they're alone, and how much harder it is to deal with all this stress by yourself rather than part of a community? And then also, I kind of wanted to nitpick, because it's like kind of a pet peeve, the difference between antisocial and asocial, where an asocial person is more someone who has an exhausting time interacting with other people and they need some space more often, whereas an antisocial person is
Just hates everyone.
antisocial
Yeah.
personality disorder. So therefore, considering the psychological angle and therefore how much psychology research you have to do, A, to make the story convincing, B, to make sure you get your terminology right.
I haven't read anything super recently where the loner character was referred to as antisocial necessarily. I'll say this much personally, I am an extrovert extraordinaire, but if it came down to a post-apocalyptic surviving by the skin of your teeth sort of thing, I don't want to have to take care of anybody else, man. Like, listen, I didn't have kids for a reason.
Yes! When you break your leg and you're out there
Yes,
by yourself, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Healing magic. I want the healing magic.
But yes, while I haven't read anything or seen anything specifically where that terminology was used, you make such a good point about antisocial versus asocial. Like, there is being just maybe just a bad person.
Well, I mean, when it comes down
versus-
to it, the antisocial stereotype, look at most of the older Westerns. That was that bad outlaw that ran by himself. And you had very few of those, but you did have them that they'd run by themselves. They were the badass that would walk into town, take on anybody in a gunfight, and then move on.
Maybe what's the new role of the actual antisocial person if they want to be part of a community? What does that community use them for?
Okay, so
Crowd control. Dealing with the problems that they either can't or don't want to do.
Something that they're
they're going to deal with.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're going to delegate it when they're not. I mean, if you have a true antisocial character, they're not going to build a community.
No.
They're going to use a community
They will be
as
the
needed.
visitors.
They'll visit and
You'll pay them.
hopefully buy or whatever, or it may just trash the place and take what they want because that's who they are, right? An antisocial person not suddenly going to create this glowing community. It's not going to happen. That's not who they are.
Well-
Whereas someone who's like introverted and just doesn't deal with crowds well, they'll find a different way to connect, and it kind of depends on what kind of world you're building.
Yeah.
You make a great point, but yeah, it depends on, as a writer, you need to be a student of psychology and of people. And if someone is just antisocial, angry, bitter, whatever, I don't see them changing. I see them probably getting worse.
Yeah.
And if anyone messes with them, they're going to go, murder hobo on them or whatever.
They
And
become
then,
the murder hobos.
and then you're going to have your hero or the community or somebody else is going to have to deal with them or fight them off or kill them or convert them or whatever you do. That's going to end up being a problem that's going to have to be resolved.
In most of the scenarios I can think of, the community's going to be paying them. They're going to come into town to get what they need supply-wise, have their one-night fling or whatever, but they take care of things. They give and take. It's just part of the symmetry of the community.
And they may be given the job that suits that personality of theirs. Go out and hunt the monsters. Bring back the heads or bring back the pelts, and
The meat.
we'll pay you
Yeah.
in rum. They get sent out to channel that aggression in a way that serves the community instead of harms the community and gives them something back that they need, which are things that they can't make for themselves.
But then, in the meantime, the community might want to keep them in a shed off the land.
They send them out on, here, go hunt as far ranging as you want to go, and when you catch everything, bring back the proof and we'll trade with you.
And their home base may not be there in the community. They may not
Right.
want to live in town. They may want to live in that cabin up on the hillside, just overlooking everything,
And that's
ready
probably-
on that call.
And that's probably a best case scenario is find ways for both sides to utilize the other, and that's great. Now you have a kind of a symbiosis or whatever you call it.
That's the basic community building anyways. Within a post-APOC, you're going to look at everyone that you have within the community. What skills are available? What can we utilize? Who has limitations? The one with emphysema over here, they're not doing any manual labor, but they can sit there and sew all day long and fix clothing before winter comes along. So you work within your community, and if you don't have those skills, you teach those skills to the ones that can do. But that
Because
loner,
if someone can't contribute, they're probably not going to live very long.
possibly not.
So that's the thing, like,
But it also depends on the rules of that
Yeah,
community.
absolutely.
You don't work,
Or the
you
rules
don't
of the
eat.
world, honestly.
yeah.
Get out, that kind of thing.
In
It-
Xander's books, they call them the numb, and they are the people who aren't contributing. They've kind of like zoned. I feel like it would be me, the ones who can't accept that this is the new reality and that they have monsters and shit, and so they're numb. They're just kind of going through the motions. They're barely alive. People have to like force them to eat, but not every community's gonna say, yeah, let's keep them alive.
Depends on how much food you have,
Yeah.
how much
Yeah.
shelter you have.
Yep.
They're going to become a liability that somebody's going to have to dedicate time to. It might sound mean, but anyone with severe disabilities or they're on constant care,
They're not gonna live.
they're in a coma that need constant looking out for, feeding tubes.
Any meds that keep you alive?
Yeah, anybody
They're gonna
that
die.
needs
Yeah.
regular medication. Well, now that's an issue.
Unless there's healing spells.
Unless there's healing
Well,
spells.
but
I
that's
really
back
want
to the
those healing
universe.
spells.
But that's one
Well,
of those.
and let me be very clear. Illnesses are very different from different abilities, okay?
Sure.
Illnesses, something like you literally need a machine to keep you breathing. Well, if it's an apocalypse where the power goes out, you're
Yeah,
screwed.
you're done.
If you are on a blood thinner or a heart medication, any
might
number
survive.
of medications that keep people alive, eventually probably sooner rather than later, you're screwed. But there is a big difference between actual illness that requires these things to keep you alive and different abilities. I just want to make that very clear.
Well, and some of those medicines can be found in nature. They just would have to be, you'd have to figure out how to make them into a tea or make them into a sap.
Or distill them down into something concentrated enough.
Yeah, blood thinners especially, heart medications,
Oh, yeah.
they come from nature originally. We forget that.
No, I was going to say heart medication comes from TNT.
This is where I'm really going to push the idea, like you mentioned earlier, people pay attention to preppers. And I mentioned my sister earlier, what you really need, if you actually have an interest in surviving like a post-apocalyptic society, I'm not saying ignore preppers, but you also really should actually be focusing on homesteading.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And being able to care for yourself, not just hoarding MREs and guns.
Mycology, you get into any plant medicine and old world mountain medicines, because there's a lot of truth in what the grandmas used to teach before Big Pharma took over. Sure. And you can learn a lot if you start delving into it.
There's a lot of in Chinese.
Yeah, Chinese medicine is beautiful for anxiety and stuff. Taking valerian root extract or a tincture. Sure. It's what Valium is based on.
One of the most common things is like air sickness or car sickness, and if you do ginger,
Yeah.
that's why like ginger ale is served so much on planes.
Yeah. And learning how you grow and how you harvest and maintain any kind of supplies like that. I mean, like ginger, you really have to have a warm environment. You can't do it in a colder environment. It'll die. So you have to keep it maintained. But things like horseradish and all that, they love the cold. They'll do fine.
So those are fun things to explore, and if you do an apocalypse, depending on what type of apocalypse it is, you can get into all kinds of different stuff. And then the question of where are you? If you set it in Alaska, they're probably all just going to die, right?
Yeah.
Listen, if you're in Alaska, you definitely need a community because you all need to be sleeping in like the same bed to keep warm.
Yeah. So that's going to be a very different world than if it's, Virginia or Florida or the middle,
Or South America, you go to the
South
Middle East.
America, the Middle East. Totally different, because if you're in an apocalypse situation, you're probably not traveling much. And if your community doesn't have the skills, you're not driving 500 miles to go see somebody. Maybe
What are you
there's no
talking about?
cars anymore.
Automobile gas absolutely lasts like 20 years. It doesn't go bad at all. The cars will still totally be running 20 years down the line.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because if you leave your car alone for 5 months, it's totally
Yeah. The question we had over here.
How do you manage the timeline of the development of your society with that loner going off and doing their own thing and then coming back to something magically being better outside of kind of like a magic system? Like, how much thought do you put into like the real timeline of the society developing while that loner is out adventuring and coming back to something maybe existing that wasn't there before?
How much research do you want to do?
It depends. Again,
Lawyer
unfortunately, a
answer.
lot of
It
our answers are,
depends.
it depends. Are you telling the story of the apocalypse as it's happening? Are you telling the story of 5 months later or 5 years later or 50 years later? Is it a thriller? Is it an adventure story? Is it, depending on, is it a romance, right? Is the beet farmer falling in love? I don't know. I don't
Leave
know.
the beet farmer alone.
I don't know. Would you guys like to read a story about a beet farmer falling in love? No, probably not.
Only if it is
I'll
written
move
from
on.
the perspective of Dwight Schrute.
So, I might have to write that. Anyway, it depends a lot on all these different factors. So if you start putting your story together, you're figuring out your setting, the time, how it ties into the apocalypse, your characters, what the focus of your story is, and that starts helping you define. And if you're writing a thriller, it's not going to be like a Tolkien-esque 2-year story. It's like, bam, thrillers go fast, right? Maybe you have to write a few of them. If you're writing an epic, a slice of life, that's very different. If you're writing a, Tolkien or Patrick Rothfuss, Name of the Wind, where you go in and just wallow around in the world, it's wonderful, totally different story than, some kind of an action thriller. So some of those choices you make are going to help you decide that.
Yes.
So I'm kind of curious more about, since going through COVID, how the psychology of people when COVID first hit around March and April 2020 and the things starting to shut down, if that had any influence on any of your following novels. Did you learn anything from it about the psychology of how people react to it for novels? And did you expect the hoarding of toilet paper? I feel like that was
COVID literally was the
Worst
epitome of loner versus the community, right? Because all of a sudden, unless like outside of, and I think we have to use the term loner in this aspect as like the people within your household, right? So like it was you if you were by yourself, because I was living by myself at that point. So it was either you by yourself if you're living by yourself, or you in your immediate household against everybody. Hence hoarding of toilet paper. It hasn't affected anything I've written because I haven't written anything recently, but what I think it really showed is the idea that, listen, with a zombie apocalypse or Last of Us, which I guess isn't technically zombies, but like something where it's a very obvious danger, whether it's people against people or let's say the environment against people, something where it's a very obvious danger that no one human or even group of humans could change. It's a literal apocalypse. People, I think, would tend to work together better in a situation like that. When this is a thing that we know about, but nobody can give me actual proof, and then it turns into like an us against them situation, that's entirely different. Again, but being a loner in 2020 was like to your advantage. I never had to worry about getting infected because there was nobody around me.
I'm not going out.
Historically, it wasn't really all that unique. What differs in history in pandemics is how visible the effect of the biogen is and how quickly. So with COVID, we had the luxury of not falling down dead within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. But when you start looking at bubonic plague, especially when it mutated into the pneumonic plague, you had people who were perfectly fine in the morning, were bleeding from all orifices copiously, and were dead by evening. That tends to be hard to deny the reality of. When it's just somebody gets a cough and then they get a worse cough and then they go off someplace we don't see them and they're in a hospital and they don't come home, that is easy to tell ourselves stories and say that it didn't happen. And you get the 1918 version of the flu, and again, you had people falling down dead within 24 to 48 hours, and bodies stacked up like cordwood on the side of the street in downtown Philadelphia because they couldn't bury them fast enough. That's hard to tell people it isn't happening, and that's hard for people, even hardcore folks who don't want to deal with it, to say, oh, I guess this isn't a thing, because there are these bodies. So it really depends on the nature of the pathogen and how it acts and how quickly and visibly and viscerally it reacts. Copious hemorrhaging, hard to ignore.
Yeah.
I think also social media played a huge part in that, because even though we were alone, we weren't really cut off. So that's a huge part of it. And I don't know if you're from here, but like maybe 10 years ago, Christmas time, we had the Snowmageddon.
Oh my God, that SNL skit is still one of my favorite things ever.
It was a frost, okay, guys? We got 4 feet of foot in snow in Utah. We're still going to school, and you guys get a frost, and everything shuts down.
Yeah, that's normal around here.
I was stuck here, and I was like, what? There's frost, and why are there cars abandoned on the side of the road? Like, this doesn't make sense.
Frost doesn't happen in this world.
I'm right there with you because I grew up in West Virginia, and in 2 foot of snow with my 2-wheel drive S10, and I'm just trucking along,
But you look at the grocery stores when the snows are predicted, and there's no milk and there's no bread. For some reason, those are the 2 things that everyone just
and
like.
beer.
Let me take all of the milk and bread.
I hope they have like nutmeg and cinnamon. They can make a crap ton of French toast.
I mean,
I'm just thinking the next time I write a scene where some guy pulls open an overcoat with cigarettes, like, hey, you want to trade? On the other side, he's going to roll the toilet paper.
I thought you were going with beets again.
You forgot the beets.
I could just see
On the other side, he's got beets?
He's got the bag of beets.
Yeah.
Okay. Bag 'em.
I will say this too, and in terms of, because I think we need to close out, bringing this back around to the loner versus the community thing, whereas people reacted to everything that happened in 2020 in a more loner mentality, I think that there was like a switch where eventually, obviously not everybody, but for me especially, I realized like having a community is super necessary. I couldn't find hand soap. My sister has several kids, and she had bought like a giant jug of hand soap, so she brought me some of her hand soap. I couldn't find antibacterial gel. One of my friends left some in my mailbox. One of my friends from New England mailed me masks because I couldn't find any of those. So like somebody might be by themselves, but again, like we've talked about earlier, you could be a loner, like living in the cabin on the hill, but you're still trading with the community or whatever, and that's kind of what that felt like. And I think that we can act like being a loner is super badass pass. If
But
I'm
most
allowed
of the
to say
loners
that.
are not actually alone.
Yeah,
they're
not totally.
constantly interacting with a community, and that is really the point, I think, is that they all build some sort of community to come back to, because most of us need a place to sleep.
Yeah.
You might not want to talk to people, but you might still need things that you can't provide for yourself.
milk and eggs for that.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Yep.
Thank you guys, you've been awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Geek Saga podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out other Geek Saga entertainment endeavors, including the Sagas and Sass webcast and podcast and Ice and Fire Con.